Hello and welcome to the Box Score Network. Something, Ben, we don't have a title for these. This is the Box Score Network. Ben and Simon have something they want to talk about. Show on YouTube. Thank you all so much for watching. The thing we want to talk about here is on Monday night, January 20th, and it's the Chicago Bears are hiring former Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson to be their new head coach. A lot of angles that we need to get into on this, a lot of teams and the domino effect that we need to get into as part of this, a lot of evaluation and consternation on Ben Johnson and how we think about all this. But first of all, Ben, welcome back. How are you? We love the coaching carousel all of a sudden. It snuck up on us, a new thing to be obsessed with. But here we are, Ben Johnson, the first real domino. We'll talk about Mike Vrabel a little bit later. We haven't touched on that yet on this show together. But Ben Johnson going to the Bears. How are you? What's your initial reaction?
Man, I'm doing great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. I got to say, I apologize to the audience for looking like I'm about to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, even though I'm indoors here. All right, look, it's 22 degrees outside. We're in the upstate South Carolina. We don't get a whole lot of this. I've got a little space heater beside me here in my office building. So anyway, we're sacrificing for you guys tonight, man. Bring you special content on Ben Johnson. I was surprised, not so much. Okay, I was partly surprised that he went to Chicago. I was more surprised that he did it so quick, man. 24 hours after the season's over. A
Mm-hmm.
surprise ending too. They didn't expect to be out of the playoffs. They think
Mm-hmm.
another 3 weeks, man. But no, here it is. He's out the door to Chicago. I was not shocked, but I was surprised. Yes.
Yeah, the expediency at which this happened, and not only Ben Johnson, but minutes after we see the notification that Ben Johnson's being hired, we're getting tweets about he's already got a staff pretty much together. So some notes on that. Dennis Allen, former head coach and defensive coordinator of the New Orleans Saints, is likely the front runner to be Ben Johnson's defensive coordinator in Chicago. And Darren Rizzi, the Rizzler, special teams coordinator and interim head coach for the New Orleans Saints, is pegged as the number one guy to be the special teams coordinator for Ben Johnson. There's a lot to get into on that, Ben, because you mentioned it. An early exit from the playoffs in which we saw Jamison Williams in a key part of the season throw an interception. We see a couple turnovers by Jared Goff. We see some
Yep.
inconsistency with the offense. I say that they scored 31 points despite having what, like four turnovers, five turnovers in this game. So like they were moving the ball. They were still doing their thing, but some things that seemed a little questionable and funny, and maybe that's just hindsight 2020. Now that we know that Ben Johnson may have had this job already kind of lined up and was already thinking about this stuff. And this goes to the whole process of the fact that these guys are interviewing for these jobs during the postseason.
Mm-hmm.
You would love if there was a better way to do this. But talk to me
Yeah.
about let's think about it from Detroit's side. How do you feel about it for Detroit seeing that early exit from the playoffs and then very quickly you mentioned it not even like 46, 44, whatever hours from that loss, Ben Johnson's on his way to a new home.
Yeah, listen, if I'm Detroit, it hurts to see him go, but I expected it, right? If I'm a Detroit person, I knew it's only a matter of time. And listen, while I admire Campbell as a head coach, he's done even better than I expected. Still, though, Ben Johnson's X's and O's were, to me, the biggest driving force besides Campbell's energy. You got those two things. It's going to be very difficult to get somebody this good. You probably won't, but what you hope is, hey, let's just find a little bit different way to do this now. No different than when Aaron Donald retires from the Rams, right? I'm not going to
Mm.
replace one for one. Let's just find a different way. Hopefully, we're still as good. We're just different. But man, if you're the Lions, it hurts to see this guy go, man. I mean, it just how good he is at the X's and O's. Um, you know, uh, it hurts. But you're right about Ben Johnson. Obviously, he's been thinking about this for 2 years, and he should be. And for him to have his staff basically already filled out is the right thing to do. Because if you know, hey, this is a job I want, like I want to be a head coach, you should already have a lot of this stuff figured out, or at least where you want to start at, right? Some of it's not going to work. You're going to have to redraw some of it, but you should always know where you're going to start at. And obviously he did. So I like that part of it, that he already seemed to know where he was going and what he wanted to do.
Yeah, there's got to be a sting, right, for the fans for how quickly this happened and on the result of a loss. But I wouldn't be I say I wouldn't be too concerned, but that's easy for me to say. But the one silver lining, if you want to look at it that way, is Dennis Allen and Darren Rizzi, like it's a very clear through line from Ben Johnson to those guys. It's not like Mike McDonald when he went to the Seahawks, right? And he's plucking from college for an offensive coordinator, and he's plucking from over here for a defensive coordinator, and getting guys that he really had no real connection to. Ben Johnson works for Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell was on that New Orleans staff with Sean Payton and Dennis Allen, and I think Darren Rizzi was there at that time too. If he wasn't, they obviously know Darren Rizzi through Dennis Allen. So there's a very like quick connection to make. So it wouldn't have taken that many phone calls for Ben Johnson to figure these guys out. But yeah, it still stinks. Not even 2 days later, and you've got Ben Johnson's leaving. He's already got a DC and a special teams coordinator lined up. For Chicago side of this, you mentioned it was a little surprising. Last week, for Fansided, wrote an article ranking who I thought the best fits for Ben Johnson would be based on his criteria. And we've seen through all this, and we talked about this in the first video, organizational alignment and clear communication on football decision making was the number one priority for Ben Johnson. And we were getting these updates through this process early on, like, hey, he might not even care if there's a quarterback situation in place, right? Which felt like a hint at the Raiders. Like they don't have a top pick in the
Yeah,
draft. They also don't have an
yeah,
incumbent quarterback. So like it was like he would almost take a buy, right, on the quarterback situation in favor of that organizational alignment. So I had the Bears at 5 out of 6. So like the second worst job he could take because you've got the McCaskey family out there in press conferences saying, I don't think it's important for GMs and coaches to have alignment on decision making, which seems like a huge red flag. And then you've got Ryan Poles as the GM, who's like going to be 4 years in, where it's like, okay, it feels like that he's going to be executing his vision. That doesn't seem like Ben Johnson's going to have a whole lot of say in what happens. And by the way, on above above Ryan Poles is Kevin Warren, CEO and president of the team, who used to run the Big Ten or the Big 12 or whatever it was, and he has a very long ago experience with an actual football team. So it's like, is he actually pulling the string? So it seems like there's a lot of strange steps here, but it seems like the quarterback won out. It seems like, hey, I get to go Coach Caleb Williams in just his second year. There's already a defense in place and there's a couple receivers. So I get to come in here and just try to work with this quarterback that's supposed to be a generational talent. So it seems like that won out more than the organizational alignment, unless he just sat down with Ryan Poles and was like, I agree with everything you're saying. So you and I are now aligned, which is not anything that we will ever be privy to that kind of conversation.
yeah. And hats off to you because you mentioned this a week or two ago. You said, "Hey, I think he might be willing to stay in division or even want to." And me and most people were thinking he'd want to get away from the Detroit division, not go up against Campbell every year, twice a year. But no, here he is right here. So you called it on that, or at least the possibility, and it's coming to fruition here. Um, Listen, I never thought he was going to go to the Saints or Jets. I just didn't think those were serious looks for him, nor the
Hmm.
Cowboys. I just never thought that. But you had four of the jobs here. Of course, the Patriots gets gone real quick. That really wasn't a huge deal. But you still had Bears, Jaguars, Raiders. And just last week, I said, hey, I think Jaguars and Raiders is where it's going, one of those two
Hmm.
spots. But
Yeah.
here he is. You're right. And listen, the owners there in Chicago, there are fans who are kind of tired of it, but I don't think they're the worst owners in football, right? When you start looking at some of the let's say more characteristic guys out there, these they may not have their whole act together, but they don't seem like they're constantly like the Tennessee owner, the Cowboys owner, the Jets owner, constantly in the way and just really crushing it. So maybe even though he's a little wary of it, maybe he did like the quarterback and GM enough to say, hey, there's a spot for me here and I like what they're doing, even though we may have to. Me and Ryan, me and Ryan Poles may have to go in there and address the owner together every once in a while. It just didn't feel like that was a huge impediment, really.
Yeah, when you think about the pairings of people and the groupings of people that they have to work with at the jobs, I was really starting to be in on the Raiders thing, like
Yeah,
because Ben Johnson, the reason he didn't go with the commander's job was like there was a bunch of basketball people involved, owner and a couple advisors and a part owner and all this, and It's like I don't know. It doesn't get much more football person than Tom freaking Brady, who it seems like we should just go ahead and mention here. It seems like Tom Brady's basically running the team. We weren't quite sure what minority owner really was going to mean for him on a day-to-day basis, but it's
Yeah.
every report is basically like he's running this thing in terms of figuring out who the head
Hmm.
coach and the GM are going to be. So we'll talk about that a little later when we talk about the Raiders. But okay, felt like that was going to be great. Okay, Jacksonville, we mentioned Balky seemed like he was maybe losing some influence over that. So maybe Ben Johnson could go in and kind of take over responsibilities. And then, by the way, he would have Trevor Lawrence. So that did
Right.
seem like a good number two. Um, New Orleans, because of that connection with Campbell, it seemed like maybe he could be safe from a like ticking time bomb cap situation, but that was always going to be kind of iffy. I actually kind of liked him for Dallas because there was only one guy you had to convince, right? There was only one guy you had to talk to,
True.
and that's Jerry Jones. And listen, Jerry Jones also a football guy. So similar to what probably ended up happening with Ryan Poles was that what I thought would happen with Jerry Jones, which was Ben Johnson could sit down, explain his vision, and Jerry Jones would be like, I think that's a really good idea, except in his southern accent or whatever, and they would be best buddies, and they would go on. Now, obviously, that didn't end up happening, and it was a big swing on that. But yeah, Chicago, just all those people kind of in the way. But maybe if we're gonna try and paint the positive picture, I think it is that, hey, Ryan Poles really is running this thing. The owners are just being like, yeah, well, whatever's going to happen, and they're not really paying attention. Kevin Warren's going to be, he is in the background, or at least he's saying, hey, for now, Poles, this is your thing, and I'll fire you if I need to. And Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles are on the same page. And, maybe if Johnson knows Poles could get fired after a year, maybe he could bring in his own GM in a year. And so that's worth taking Caleb Williams under his wing. Um, Bringing Dennis Allen and bringing Darren Rizzi. I know other than Darren Rizzi, clogging a toilet and introducing stretching and being funny as an interim head coach, we don't have a lot of thoughts on him, how he is a special teams coordinator. But Dennis Allen coming and potentially being the defensive coordinator for Ben Johnson, how do you feel about that?
I'm okay with it. I would have to go back and double down on my research on what Allen actually did before he got his turn as head coach of the Saints. I don't want Allen as a head coach anywhere, but he's not head coach. He's DC, so I'm okay with it. Um, if they felt good together and they liked what they got going on, I'm okay with it. Were there a whole bunch of other names for defensive coordinators out there that I would have liked better? Yes, but those guys are getting head coach looks right now. So
Hmm.
you'd kind of be sitting there waiting to see if those guys are even available because if they can get a head coach job, they're going to grab it.
Right.
So Ben Johnson kind of had to make a choice here. Do I go with the guy I know and a guy I like? Or if I think there's someone better who I'm not really connected to, do I wait on him for 4 or 5 weeks? So I'm perfectly fine with it. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of guys as defensive coordinator, and listen, Dennis Allen is a heck of a defensive coordinator. He did a great job with those Saints teams. He did a good job in the past at other stops. Um, Maybe the next Steve Spagnuolo, right? Where it's like he tried the head coaching
Yeah.
thing. He got to
Maybe.
try it a couple times. Spags is still out there, but um, just be an old crotchety defensive mastermind kind of deal. And when you're a first time head coach, having someone on your staff with head coach experience and a true mastery of the opposite side of the ball, you're like, okay, I can put all that away. I don't have to think about the defense. And at the same
Yeah.
time, if I have questions about just like my day to day as a head coach, right, and someone to lean
Yeah.
on and just someone to go through it with that's been through it too, like I have that guy there with me. So I like Dennis Allen there in that and that Saints connection. It feels like they've got a little bit of the same DNA. Anything else for you here on Ben Johnson? I mean, we could do this for hours, but we'll talk about it all off season, what the ramifications are going to be. Anything else for you on Ben Johnson, the Bears? What do you think this means for Caleb Williams? How do you think this will work out for the young quarterback?
If it's not going to work out for Caleb here and now, then it's just not going to. They'll get him, I assume, a little bit because I like Ryan Poles' work here, generally speaking. They'll get him some more weapons, a little bit better offensive line during this offseason. But if it doesn't happen in the next couple of years, it's probably just not going to. So I love it for Caleb. And listen, let me give the Bears props here. They got the big fish. All right, they got the guy that
Hmm.
everybody wanted for the past 2 seasons. Now, there's no guarantees, as always, until you see a guy take on this new role. head coach, GM, whatever, until you actually get him. You don't know what he's going to do with it, but it looks pretty good. This is the guy that everybody wanted. So hats off to the Bears. I criticized them last week for casting such a wide net when they had so many weeks to think about who they wanted to get. And when they weren't coming in with a new GM, it was an already set GM. I really thought, just like Ben Johnson knew what guys he wanted to put on his staff, I really think if you're a GM who's been around for 3, 4 years, you should already know who you want to be your coach. Well, maybe they did already know who they wanted to be their coach, and they were just kind of buying time here by casting this wide net, making it look like they were doing their homework. And hats off to them for that if it is. But I criticized them last week. Hats off to them this week for getting this done. It's a home run hire, even though we don't know what this guy will actually do as coach until we see him next year.
I uh I pulled up over the cap the offensive line free agents because this is going to be the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
For a year, can they just go with an all olds offensive line? I mean, Zach Martin's a free agent, Ryan Kelly, Brandon Sheriff, maybe a little Ronnie Stanley. Stanley. He had a bounce back year this year. And then just to keep it with the old guys, go a little Morgan Moses at right tackle. Um, Ben Bredesen is having a real good year for the Bucks, but I doubt they let him walk out the door. Mekhi Becton had that nice year for Philly. Do they take him over there? Just rebuild the whole thing. Just start ground up. But yeah, I think for Caleb Williams, it's going to be interesting because obviously we've seen Ben Johnson with a completely different quarterback in Jared
Yeah.
Goff, but this
Yes.
is another one of those tests, right? Like, do you coach to your players, or are you going to put Caleb Williams kind of in a box, or
Yep.
is all the Jared Goff stuff going to be okay? This is your new baseline. This is your new floor, and your ceiling will be decided by you, basically. We'll see. But yeah, I think this is a good baseline. I'm at least glad it's an offensive minded guy, a guy who has proven to put his quarterback in a good situation, and now it'll just be about putting the roster pieces together with that as well. All right, let's move on here. Let's get to a couple other hirings. You mentioned some other defensive coordinators that were out there. Lou Anarumo becomes the defensive coordinator for the Colts. The Colts have been under Gus Bradley here for a while, the past couple regimes, but Lou Anarumo goes from Cincinnati after this one really down year, but a couple
Yep.
years removed from the one, good year. And he's going to go work for Shane Steichen and the Colts. How do you feel about that one?
So me personally, I like it. Now, listen, you and I both know people whose opinions I respect, I value, who don't want Anarumo as a DC hardly anywhere. But I like him. I'm not suggesting he's top 10 in the league, but I like his work. Now, the problem is he goes from a Cincinnati team who was really losing some talent at, say, the secondary levels of the past couple of seasons, especially safety, of course, but that entire secondary. You got the Colts team that's probably worse in the secondary, to be honest. So, I don't expect him to work wonders here. I don't think he's that good, but I like his work. I think he will help make this Colts defense a little bit better. But, the GM's got to add some talent here, and hopefully together you make this a better defense. So I like the hire. By itself, I don't think it will move the needle a lot here, but I do like it, and I do like him as a DC. Let's they got one more year at this, I think, and then we'll see what the owner wants to do there. But Anarumo's basically got 1 year to see if he can help get this team up because I don't know how much patience anybody's going to have there in Indianapolis.
Yeah, no doubt. They'll need a little bit more talent, but you're getting a guy who, with the right pieces, can put a good game plan together. So that's going to make Malachi Starks, the safety out of Georgia, an even
There you go.
higher fun pick in mock drafts than it already was to help that secondary because we know Anarumo likes to have good safety play. So we will see how that works, but I think that's a good hire. That's one of the better defensive coordinators on the market. The Titans have a new general manager, Mike Borgonzi, from the Kansas City Chiefs. Borgonzi has been with the Chiefs since 2009, doing a number of different things, including as a scout and then director of pro scouting and player personnel and football ops, and was the assistant general manager from 2021 to 2024. So, we were just talking about Ryan Poles, another guy that was with the Kansas City Chiefs for a number of years. Poles, looking through his history, by the way, was never truly a scout. He was a scouting assistant for a year, and then he went straight to college scouting coordinator for 5 years. Um, and then he went into the director of college scouting and then assistant director for player personnel, stuff like that. Feels a lot more administrative than boots on the ground. Borgazzi seems like a little bit more, hey, I came up as an actual scout and worked my way through that way. But he is going to the Tennessee Titans to be their new general manager and to work with, again, former Bengals coordinator there on the offensive side of the ball in Callahan. So, what do you think about the Titans trying to tap into what the Chiefs got going on?
I like the hire here. Now, I got to put a big caveat on it here right up front. With a general manager, it's even more difficult to try to predict and project what he's going to do because in 95% of the cases, they've never been a general manager before. They've never been the decision
Hmm.
maker. They've contributed, they've watched somebody else do it, but they didn't have responsibility for those decisions. They got to kind of do what I do, which is sit off on the side and kind of contribute, you know? But it's totally different when you're the guy, and, you know, there's just no way to gauge. It's just like a first time head coach. You know, there's no true way to gauge. We don't even get to know really with these new GMs how much they actually did contribute, you know, because we don't
Hmm.
get to see that, you know. In a lot of cases, we kind of sort of sometimes get to see if you're a coordinator how much you've contributed to the weekly game plan, but GMs we don't get to see that. We know what roles they played. That's it. We don't know how valuable their input was, if they were really good at it or not. But that aside, I like the hire. Borgonzi is a name that has been around the GM candidate circles for a few seasons. This isn't just like out of the blue. It's not
Hmm.
just like, hey, the Chiefs are winning. Let's go grab somebody out of there.
Right.
He's a legit name, and you mentioned him rising up through the ranks, which I like. But also, he's actually we do know he's at least been in the room on a lot of the important stuff that was going on. Whether he was just riding coattails or was a major contributor, we'll find out when he does this job. But I like it. He's gotten to see a lot of cool stuff from Andy Reid, and it's amazing how you say, "Well, Andy Reid's a coach." It's amazing, just like Bill Belichick with the Patriots, how much
Oh yeah.
that good, brilliant coach, roster builder, influences everything in the whole organization. So I'm sure he's learned just as much off of Andy Reid as he has anybody else there in the building. And I do think that's important too. So, what I am worried about, though, the early reports, and again, you never know with the media if it's just, you know, make believe because they need something to talk about, if it's legit sourced material. We're hearing names like Nagy and Spagnolo coming over as head coach. All right. While Spagnolo is somewhat interesting because he's a brilliant defensive mind, the Nagy hire, don't need it. Do not bring him to Tennessee, man. All right. We've seen enough of that as head coach. There's some legit guys out there to hire as head coach, and he's not one of them. Even Spagnolo as head coach is a little sus because we've seen him before too. But he's got that brilliant defensive mind. But anyway, to me, if you're Borgonzi, I wouldn't be pulling off of old friends here. I do think you need to do a legit head coach search and pull out one of the top names if you can get them.
Would so at this point in the game, would you consider moving on from Callahan still? If you're Borgonzi, you kind of get in. Do you think the Titans in all of their off schedule stuff might be bring in Borgonzi and say, hey, now that you're here, if you want to meet Callahan, because not a lot of guys have been
Right,
obviously not a lot of guys have been hired yet, so I guess they
right.
could do that. Do you think that's still a possibility, or at the end of the day, do you think he'll give it a year and then maybe look at those guys that you're mentioning and then other guys kind of next year or 2 years down the line?
Yeah, honestly, in this case, I'm happy either way. The Probably the best thing to do is give Callahan 1 year because he
Hmm.
kind of sort of deserves it, if you will. Get him that
Hmm.
second year. Plus, it gives you Borgonzi time to settle in, right? So that
Yeah.
would be the smart move. But I will say, if you're looking at two guys, let's say Brian Flores and Aaron Glenn,
Hmm.
and you like one of them, then I wouldn't wait a year. You know, they may both be hired.
Yep.
So, you know, if you got two guys here now that you really like, I'd get aggressive and grab one of them, even though it might not be fair to Callahan.
Yeah.
So I would let that be my guide. If I got two guys I like, I go after them. If I don't, then let's play it out for a year.
A couple other moves that are a little older. We won't spend much time on this, but just since we last spoke, the Browns made a couple offensive promotions that were internal. We mentioned they fired their offense coordinator Ken Dorsey and their O line coach last video. They bring in up some internal guys, not long-standing guys with Stefanski. So I think this was just we need to mix some things up. And then Mike Vrabel obviously got hired to be the Patriots head coach. Um, this is old news by now, Ben, but just your 30-second opinion on Mike Vrabel as head coach of the Patriots.
I don't like the way it all went down. I don't think it's fair to Mayo. I think that sucked. But I like Vrabel. I said from the start of this offseason, he's one of the two or three guys I would trust to hand my roster over to. And while I'm not convinced that he's so brilliant that he just automatically transforms everything in the building, I am convinced that if I do my job as GM and give him a decent roster, that he can carry it to the Super Bowl. I do believe that. So while I don't like the way it all went down, I don't like that at all. I think they've got the right guy here. So
And we'll see what happens. We did talk about the when Mayo was fired in the video, and we talked about the
yeah,
possibility of Vrabel. And for me then, and I mean now it's who's going to be his OC. And I think the main one that's been talked about so far and at least reached out to about an interview is Thomas Brown, interim
yeah.
head coach, pass game coordinator, OC of the Chicago Bears. It's a very similar path for him with the Carolina Panthers 2 years ago as well. And that was a guy that
Yes,
we said in I think that video recently, like, can we please just give this guy one full year to be just an offensive coordinator? That
just
would be
1 year.
great. So that would be fun. I mentioned bringing back Alex Van Pelt, who was there just this past year to work, continue to work with Drake May.
Yeah,
Because I know they're keeping their special teams coordinator. I forget his name now, but we'll see. We'll see who he pairs as the offensive coordinator because I think that's going to be his first real big test is nailing that one.
yes,
All right. Other moves. So some firings since we last talked. Nick Sorensen is out as defensive coordinator for the 49ers. That happened pretty recent or pretty soon after our last video. So they've been interviewing some familiar names like Robert Saleh and Deshae Townsend, who is on that Lions coaching staff as well. So we'll see if the Lions continue to lose some people here. Um, Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco are out with the Raiders in a hilarious schedule where Pierce is like 2 days after everybody else, and then Telesco is 2 days after that. And Mike McCarthy officially parted ways with the Dallas Cowboys. McCarthy was able to interview with the Bears, but not as soon as the Bears wanted, funnily enough, because the Cowboys denied McCarthy that ability while he was still under contract, only to let him walk a few days later. You know, Ben, we did a preview carousel preview episode, and then we did a Black Monday reaction video. So Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco in that Black Monday video, we said we were surprised they were still there, but we kind of already talked about the reasons those guys keep moved on from. It looks like it's just gonna be a clean slate for the Raiders. 49ers, yeah, their defense was down this year, and Shanahan just every couple of years gets pissed at whoever his defensive coordinator is, if it's not literally D'Amico Ryans or Robert Saleh. So whatever, we'll see what they do there. We'll talk about some interviews later, but Mike McCarthy in Dallas, we hinted at Jerry Jones and this job earlier. What do you think about Mike McCarthy being out, and what do you think his prospects are at getting another job?
no surprise that McCarthy's out. Although I wouldn't have been surprised if he had stayed. I really feel like Dallas probably should have kept him because I don't know that the group of guys you're looking at is going to be a major upgrade. So no surprise either way there. Whatever would have happened with Dallas, and while I'm not a huge McCarthy guy, just never have been, I think you could do worse than him in a couple of these spots too. So for some of these guys, like maybe the Jets, the Saints, it's going to come down to McCarthy versus a completely unproven coordinator coming in, and not even a top coordinator, one of the second or third guys, right? So you could do worse than McCarthy, but that's where I'm at with that. I got to say, though, if I'm the 49ers, I'm throwing some money at Robert Saleh to get him back
Hmm.
here at defensive coordinator. I know he's getting head coach interviews, so you might have to wait to see what pans out with that. But I'm going to let Robert Saleh know I want him in the building. If I could get D'Amico Ryan's back, I'd get him, but he's not available. He's a little
Yeah,
busy.
he's not going
Yeah,
anywhere.
no. So it's Saleh's the one available. I'd throw a little extra money at Saleh if I could, just to get him back in the building, keep him for a couple of seasons. I need him.
All right, let's talk about some second interviews and some other interviews that are happening. So second interviews are kind of just starting to take place. The Saints are scheduling second interviews with Aaron Glenn, defensive coordinator of the Lions, and Mike Kafka, offensive coordinator of the Giants, who has that Chiefs background as well. The Jets have a second interview lined up with Aaron Glenn too, and the Jaguars have a second interview lined up with Robert Saleh, Liam Cohen, offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Patrick Graham, who was the defensive coordinator for the Raiders, who was retained by Antonio Pierce for another year, and then his contract ran out. But he probably would have been, let go of as well. But his contract ran out. But he's getting a few defensive coordinator looks. In terms of those second interviews, Aaron Glenn at a couple spots, Kafka, Sala, Graham, Cohen, and those teams are the Saints, the Jets, and the Jags that are getting those lined up already. What stands out to you?
It'll be Aaron Glenn and even Liam Cohen for kind of the same reason. Um, we're in this group of guys now who we haven't seen as head coaches, right?
Hmm.
Plus, even though we kind of sort of like what they've done as coordinators, they haven't just been so brilliant that it's obvious they need to be hired right away, right? Um, I like Liam Cohen. I just kind of, and again, I don't have a great body of work to point to here, but I like the way he handles himself. He seems like he might even be a better head coach than offensive coordinator. Seems like he has that it factor about him. But I feel the same way about Aaron Glenn. Listen, there was something I said this on our different show. I didn't like the way Aaron Glenn led this defense, to be honest, starting midway through the season when all the injuries hit up until they got exited from the playoffs. But even so, when I hear Aaron Glenn talk and when I watch him work, and when I've watched his work the past couple of seasons, I think this is a guy who's got the ability to be the head coach and give him 3 years and see what he can do. So Aaron Glenn first, he's got the longer body of work, and I would love to see him get either the Jets job or the Saints job. Is probably my next strongest feeling.
Yeah, Aaron Glenn, I think just last year was rated as like the number one defensive coordinator in the NFL, or maybe it was overall assistant coach by the players. Players love him. Longtime player, played from 94 to '08, and he played for the Jets for the majority of that. Was a two-time Pro Bowler over what a 7-year, 8-year span with the Jets. Also spent time in Dallas, also spent time in Jacksonville, and then his final year was just for a few games, but that was with the Saints, where he then was an assistant coach for a very long time. So three teams, four teams there with head coach openings that Aaron Glenn has a tie to. I'm with the Jets for you, like you. I'm on the Jets with you for Aaron Glenn. I want to see a defensive person there. He played there for a long time. I don't think he's going to have any issues with the media side of it. Um, I want that defense to be fixed, and I want that to be fixed first, and then he can pluck somebody from the Lions' offensive staff to be his offensive coordinator. We'll have thoughts on that at some point later. But I think Aaron Glenn and the Jets would be a lot of fun, and for the Jags, I think all of these guys make sense. Again, that was Robert Saleh, Patrick Graham, Liam Cohen, but I think Liam Cohen's probably the front runner. They wanted Ben Johnson. I think you get a guy there who can help put a competent. Everything right now needs to be about setting up Trevor Lawrence for success. And we
Yeah.
watched Liam Cohen work with the Rams for a little while, and we watched him put together an offense that made Baker Mayfield, look fantastic this season and improve the run game because that was the thing that Bucks offense was missing last year, and they had a great run game this year. So between that
Yeah.
and the quarterback, that's something that um, Liam Cohen to the Jags would be really appealing to. Let's go through kind of team by team, and I'm just gonna go and let you know some other head. We'll start with the head coaching interviews, and then we'll get into some of the coordinator interviews, and then we'll finish out with some predictions here. So the Dallas Cowboys. Here's who they have had interviews with. It's a very short list. And again, they waited a week, by the way, to part ways with Mike McCarthy. So they didn't even get a chance to interview Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn before their playoff games officially started. But the Cowboys so far have interviewed Leslie Frazier, former defensive coordinator for the Bills, has been a head coach before, was most recently the Seahawks assistant head coach. Kellen Moore, Eagles offensive coordinator, former offensive coordinator for the Cowboys, and Robert Saleh. Uh, what piques your interest there for the Cowboys? Whether it's just looking at what the names are, who the names are, and then if anyone screams Dallas Cowboy head coach to you.
I well, not a whole lot.
Obviously, Deion Sanders is not on this list. He has not yet had an interview or has been officially scheduled to have
Right.
an interview.
No, he hasn't. Listen, I don't know what to do with Dallas. Dallas fans are just kind of in wait mode for a few years. Let's that's how Dallas fans are. I'm not sure anybody you bring in is going to make a huge difference. So I guess if Jerry feels good with the guy, then let's go. Um, the Dion thing is a real thing because we're had confirmed reports that Dion and Jerry have talked informally, and that both
Hmm.
guys separately are in favor of the idea.
Hmm.
But what we don't know is who else in the building, the Cowboys building, has a powerful voice who is saying, let's not do the Dion thing. Let's go a more traditional route, right? Somebody who's got a little more head coaching experience, like Saleh, or somebody who's just been a coordinator at the NFL level. So that's the part we don't know. So maybe that will or won't come to fruition. Well, I'm just not super excited about this Cowboys group, to be honest. When I look at who these other teams are looking at and who the Cowboys are looking at, it's just not super exciting. So,
You hire Dion. You force 11 teams to not draft Shadur. You take him at 12. You trade Dak Prescott to the Cleveland Browns for the second overall pick. You draft Travis Hunter.
yes,
I
I
think
can
that's
get behind that.
I think that's the move. I don't want any of that. That all sounds horrible. I also wouldn't do that to Dak Prescott. All right, Jacksonville. We mentioned second interviews with Saleh, Patrick Merriam, Liam Cohen. They've also done all the other big names of this cycle: Joe Brady, Brian Flores, Todd Monken, also Kellen Moore, and Steve Spagnuolo. So, who's your kind of what stands out to you about that list, and then anybody stand out in particular?
I like four guys here. I like the Joe Brady thing. I like Liam Cohen. But again, those are youngerish guys who may
Hmm.
need some more seasoning. But then, you get to some more maybe serious names, if you will. It's Brian Flores and Aaron Glenn.
Hmm.
Um, I'd love to bring in Brian Flores, but I kind of doubt that Trent Baalke is going to do that. I don't see Baalke really bringing in a strong-minded
Yep.
character here. He already did that with Harbaugh. That didn't go too well by the end.
Hmm.
I just don't see Baalke bringing Flores to Jacksonville. Um, and it sounds like Aaron Glenn is getting a lot of attention from other teams. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure how that's going to be. So if I'm losing out on Flores and Glenn, for me it's Brady or Cohen. I would feel good about either hire, to be honest.
Yep. The Raiders. So we mentioned looking for a GM and a head coach. Tom Brady feels like he's going to be um, at the forefront of this decision making. Head coach interviews. Pete Carroll, that's scheduled, hasn't happened yet. Same with Aaron Glenn. Vance Joseph scheduled. Todd Monken. Uh, I think it's just requested. I don't think that's even been scheduled yet. Ron Rivera. Scheduled. Robert Saleh scheduled. Steve Spagnuolo scheduled. So no head coach interviews have actually been completed by the Raiders yet. Probably because they're also at the same time trying to do requests for their general manager. They're looking at a Chargers assistant GM, Chad Alexander, Brandon Brown from the Giants, who is doing a second interview. John Spytek of the Bucks, John Eric Sullivan of the Packers, and Sheldon White of the Steelers. What stands out to you about what the Raiders are trying to do?
It's all sloppy. That's really what stands out here, and I think we maybe know why because you mentioned Brady again. Is he fully involved, halfway involved? You know,
Brady's out there trying to call games on Sunday and get schedule people for interviews on Monday, Tuesday.
there's a guy, yeah.
There's a lot happening here. Yeah.
It's sloppy. I listen. It's not a bad list here. Honestly, I'd love considering Ben Johnson's gone. I'd love Brian Flores here to the Raiders, but he's not even on their
Right.
interview list. I think that would be a good hire here.
I wonder how
I
much of
like
that
Pete.
is the whole Brady, Dolphins, Brian Flores thing. I wonder if it's any of that.
It's a noticeable absent name, right? I mean,
Yep.
Flores talking to a lot of people here. Pete Carroll, by the way, is a guy that I talked about it a month ago. I would love to see him in Dallas. That would excite me. I think that would be legit too. But whatever. Uh, Here with the Raiders, out of this list that we're talking about, I mean, Aaron Glenn again, I would like, but it sounds like he's got other places he may end up at. They're just chasing him stronger. They're kind of goofing around. Listen, I don't like that the Raiders let go of their GM after one year. This is
Mm.
a organization that has just been in flux for a very long time, and I don't like what they're doing here, the direction they're taking. So I just don't have any good feelings about it, to be honest.
All right, let's get to the New Orleans Saints. This one looks a little more typical. Once again, we have Joe Brady, Aaron Glenn, Mike Kafka, Cliff Kingsbury. Um, Joe Brady and Aaron Glenn have been completed. Kafka has done one interview, a second is scheduled. Kingsbury is scheduled. Mike McCarthy has been reached out to. Kellamore and Darren Rizzi have been interviewed already. David Shaw, former Stanford head coach and current Broncos exec, because they just can't quit the Sean Payton tree. He was requested. And then Anthony Weaver, defensive coordinator for the Dolphins. First time he pops up for us. He has already interviewed and has a second interview scheduled. What stands out to you here about the Saints?
I'm going to ask you about Kafka here in a minute, your opinion on him, because he's popped up a couple of times now, and I don't have a huge feeling on him. But I like this Saints list because even though I rake the Saints over the coals all the time for a lot of different reasons, at least they kind of sort of seem to know who they are, and they seem more organized because they know who they are, and they seem to have put together a list here that would kind of fit who they are. So I'm okay with this list. My expectations for the Saints aren't big anyway. Aaron Glenn, if they can pull him in, I think that's a solid hire. If they were to bring in Mike McCarthy, it kind of sort of fits what they already do. I'm okay with that, really, honestly. Um, Even giving Cliff Kingsbury a look, which, while it didn't end great in Arizona, it had its moments, and he seems to have grown as a coordinator in Washington. I'm a big David Shaw guy. If you dial the clock back 6, 7, 8 years, he was a huge name on
Mm.
NFL circles, but that time kind of came and went. I like David Shaw here. I like those names right there: Glenn, Kingsbury, and McCarthy. Shaw, none of it's going to move the needle a lot, but it will fit what the Saints do. So I like the list.
Yeah, it feels very floor raising, but also forward thinking, right? And a little like Jacksonville. Jacksonville kind of had this too. Um, Joe Brady, Aaron Glenn, and Darren Rizzi, obviously, and David Shaw all have some kind of connection to that Sean Payton level or Sean Payton time period with the Saints too. So there's some familiarity there, which is probably why they're able to move through this pretty quickly. Mike Kafka, uh, that's just another guy you pull in because he was with the Chiefs for a while, right? I mean, he started with the Chiefs literally
Yeah.
in 2017 when Mahomes was drafted. He was the quarterbacks coach for 2 years, quarterbacks coach and passing game coordinator for 2 years. And then he's been plucked. He was plucked by Dayball to go to the Giants for the last couple seasons. Um, so a guy that's coached and worked under Andy Reid, a guy that has worked with and been around Patrick Mahomes. So I'm not surprised that he is getting a couple of looks here. I don't think it would be a bad move necessarily. He and the Giants, it's been kind of weird. He was promoted to assistant head coach as well as offensive coordinator this year, but it's been on and off if he's the play caller or not, or if Dayball's the play caller. So this might be a person who I'd rather hire to be my play caller somewhere rather than straight to head coach. But hey, a former
Okay.
player as well. Maybe it's just someone that everyone's gotten really good vibes at, from especially from a guy like Andy Reid. If Andy Reid's signing off on it, then teams are going to definitely pay attention to that, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. That's kind of what I expected. But listen, I like the Saints list overall.
All right, let's get to the New York Jets and their interviews here because they're doing a lot of interviews, Ben. Um, and again for GM as well as head coach. So head coach interviews that have happened: Brian Flores, Aaron Glenn, Jeff Hafley from the Packers, Vance Joseph, Mike Loxley, the Maryland head coach, Josh McCown from Minnesota, Matt Nagy, Ron Rivera, Dan Rizzi, Rex Ryan from ESPN, who was their coach 10 years ago and got fired. Just, you know, Bobby Slowick, Arthur Smith, Steve Spagnuolo, Jeff Ulbrich, who was their um, interim head coach, but he's been hired by the Falcons to be their defensive coordinator. And then Joe Witt, the defensive coordinator from the Commanders. They also requested an interview with Joe Brady. It doesn't look like he officially declined, but it doesn't look like he has done an interview either. So that's another note. And then GM requests, a lot of them. Some guys from the Bengals, the Falcons, the Rams, the Bills, the Bucks. I'm trying to see if any of these names they are interviewing Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl. That's interesting. Louis Riddick from ESPN. That's pretty interesting. John Robinson, the Titans GM who was fired in favor of Mike Vrabel. That's pretty interesting. Nobody here that is also on the GM search, I don't think, for the Raiders job. Maybe the Chargers guy. Do. Quick. Nope, nobody. It doesn't look like there's any overlap, which is interesting there. So the Jets, it's obviously probably the worst job you can have. What's happening with Aaron Rodgers? What's happening with Woody Johnson? We've mentioned Aaron Glenn a lot for this. He's the only one they have a second interview scheduled for at the moment. How are you feeling about this list that they're doing? Because it's quite a big one.
Uh, Crazy Jets, right? That's what it feels like.
Hmm.
Part of the problem is you don't have your general manager in place, so it's not easy to conduct your head coach search when you don't have the general manager because you don't. Even if you pick a decent head coach, what if he doesn't get along with the guy you hire as general manager and you're starting over in a season or two because of that, right? So it's a little messy, but that's why the wide net. I don't mind the wide net for the Jets because again, they're kind of starting from scratch on everything but defense, right? I like Aaron Glenn here. I like him for the Saints, but I like him here better. You need some stability. I think he'll bring that, and then paired with it at the general manager spot, I like Thomas Dimitroff, who used to be the Falcons general manager. I think doing that right there, those two hires, well, I don't know that either one is earth shattering. I do feel like they would bring some stability. And again, you almost kind of double team the owner at that point. You have two real professionals here um, who just bring stability and they talk to Woody and they keep Woody from going crazy all the time. They settle Woody down. I feel like that's both good for the Jets here. And then you've mentioned Aaron Glenn working with this defense. You've sold me on that. So I like Aaron Glenn better here than even the Saints, even though I really like him for the Saints job. So that to me feels like what I would want to do here. The Jets, their job isn't coveted. You mentioned it; it's the worst one. So there are some guys who have kind of been toward the top of the general manager lists for 2, 3, 4 seasons now who aren't necessarily talking to the Jets because they just don't want to go over and talk to Woody. They'd rather just stay the number two man over somewhere else.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
it's kind of what's happening here. But still, you have some decent candidates here, and those are the two I like.
All right, let's see. Quick run through of the coordinators. The Falcons, I mentioned they hired Jeff Ulbrich from the Jets to be their DC. The Bengals, I just sent this to you because right after the national championship ended, Ben, the Bengals are tabbing Notre Dame defensive coordinator Al Golden to be their top candidate for the DC job. They'll be talking to him very soon. Zach Taylor has been waiting, so they have interviewed. They put out interview requests for Patrick Graham and DeMarcus Covington from the Patriots, but it seems like this is the guy they've been waiting for. So Zach Taylor pegs a college coach to be the defensive coordinator. Mentioned the Colts and Anarumo, the 49ers and Sala. And the Seattle Seahawks are looking for an offensive coordinator. But real quick for you, the Bengals. Any thoughts for you on the Notre Dame DC as their maybe top guy?
Not a lot. He's got a good defensive mind. He generally upgrades anywhere he goes, so I like that. He's even done some head coaching too at the college rink, so I like that. Um, but I don't have a huge feel on that. You're really the better coordinator guy. I'm gonna toss out some names to you here because again, we're looking at 3 or 4 different teams here. So I want to get your opinion here. Wink Martindale getting a little bit of interviews. Steve Wilkes is available out there. Patrick Graham, who we've mentioned twice already
Mm-hmm.
on this program, we've already mentioned Solid for the 49ers here. Hank Hank Fraley as well. Any of those four guys that you're just like, hey, no matter which team you are, you should be really looking at this guy very strongly for a coordinator position.
Let's see. On either side of the ball,
Yeah,
Spec-
on either one.
let's see.
Most of that's defense, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I think Patrick Graham needs to be a defensive coordinator again next year. He did such a good job with that Raiders team a couple of years ago, and even last year for everything that was happening. Did a pretty solid job. But Patrick Graham, I think going to the Bengals definitely makes a lot of sense. And then on the offensive side of the ball, let's take some time. And obviously, if Saleh doesn't get a head coach job and he just wants to go back to the 49ers for a couple seasons, be their DC, that I mean that would be pretty sweet.
Yes.
Seattle. Let's talk about Seattle so we can talk about some of these offensive guys because they have interview requests out for the offensive coordinators. You mentioned Hank Fraley, Lions offensive line coach. Ben, could you imagine if the Lions lose Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, and Hank Fraley?
All three in one offseason.
That's that's so tough.
Campbell's
Um,
gonna be like, "That's all right. I'll do it myself."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, and I guess that offensive line, they're in pretty good shape, but still, that's so tough. But Clint Kubiak obviously had us all thinking the Saints were going to be a top 10 offense for a few weeks there. And Grant Udinski, a Vikings assistant head offensive coordinator, as well as Thomas Brown, that has not been completed yet. But Kubiak and Udinski have second interviews already scheduled. Hank Fraley just had the one. I'm sure they'll get to another one here shortly. Obviously, I want to see Thomas Brown get a true OC job somewhere with a good situation. But yeah, if Hank Fraley goes and helps that run game, helps that Seattle offensive line, which has been
Yeah.
miserable for years, I think that
Yeah.
would be a lot of fun. And Clint Kubiak, puts the good stuff together, and he made their offensive line look pretty good there for a little while before everyone started getting banged up. So I think those three guys from the offense side of the ball, and then I mentioned like Alex Van Pelt, I thought did a good job with the Patriots this year. So that's a bummer he's out after just 1 year. I'd like to see him get another chance somewhere. So once we start maybe in a week or two, Ben, we'll do an updated version of this before coordinators get officially hired, and we'll start pairing some head coaches to some coordinators on who needs what specifically and what makes the most sense. Um, I want to dive back here quickly to this Raiders job, and not even the job specifically, but who they're looking at and interviewing. I'm surprised they don't have more of the young offensive guys on here. They don't have Kellen Moore. They don't have Joe Brady. They don't have Liam Cohen. They had Ben Johnson, obviously, and they have Todd Monken, who's an offensive coordinator, but he's older. Other
Yeah.
than that, it's
Yeah.
defense and it's old guys. Pete Carroll,
Yep.
Vance Joseph, Ron Rivera, Sala, Spagnuolo. So, they went with Antonio Pierce, but over the last year and year plus, technically defense, but kind of in-house CEO type. But before that, they had Josh McDaniels. Obviously they did the Gruden thing for a little while, so maybe they're looking to go the defensive side of the ball, which is just interesting. I don't know. I mean, I guess for Brady and his experience, under Bowles, or did he ever? Was that last year under Bowles? I think technically. But obviously Belichick all those years, like looking at those defensive minded guys, I think is pretty interesting because if you don't have a true route to a quarterback, a young quarterback, it's not a big deal. But it makes me nervous if they were to like throw a lot of money at a Sam Darnold or something. If they're gonna have, let's say, any of these names, man, Robert Sala, and he gets a McVay assistant. Who did he have? I mean, he already fired him from the Jets, so probably not. The other, oh, it's gonna kill me. The other LaFleur, he had a LaFleur brother, I think, in there at OC at one point. But just someone like that, just pluck somebody from McVay or Shanahan
Yeah.
and then tries to make Sam Darnold work. Like that would make me real nervous. So, yeah, the Raiders, interesting. Not going with the offensive guys. Um, let's make a couple predictions real quick, and then we'll get close to getting out of here. Who's going to be the head coach of the Jets as we sit here right now on January? It's not the 21st as we record past midnight.
I hope they don't blow this. You and I both like a very popular name for them. I mean, it's not like he's buried down the list. I hope they just go ahead and make the move and pull Aaron Glenn in. So that'll be my prediction. You like it, I like it. It's not the Jets don't always screw stuff up. It's just like in the end, it all turns into a pile of rubble, right? So, I think they can get this right.
Give me Aaron Glenn. They interviewed Josh McCown as a head coach candidate, but he's a QB coach right now. Let's make Josh McCown the offensive coordinator. He played for the Jets for a long time. And go ahead and give me, I know you mentioned Dimitrov. Give me Chris Spielman, Lions special assistant to the president, CEO, and chairperson. So you get Aaron Glenn and Spielman from the Lions.
Yeah,
And yeah, then give me Josh McCown as the offense coordinator. Jags, who do you have going to the Jaguars as of now?
I think that's still very early, honestly, is what it feels like to me. But you mentioned the leading candidate being Liam Cohen. Sometimes you just have a feel for a guy and you can be completely off. But I like Liam Cohen the short time I've seen him. And again, I don't think the Jaguars are obviously they missed out on Ben Johnson if they were ever looking at him hard. I don't know, but they've missed out on him. They've missed out on Vrabel, of course, for Patriot reasons. So I think Liam Cohen works there. I don't think they're going to bring Brian Flores in for reasons I already mentioned. I feel like Aaron Glenn's got other pulls. So to me, it comes down to just a couple of names, and I feel like Liam Cohen gets the edge there.
Give me Liam Cohen, and the Bucks have a lot of former players that would be good DC candidates on that staff. But just for some dot connecting, and I mentioned him earlier, they interviewed Patrick Graham as well. So give me Patrick Graham as the defensive coordinator under Liam Cohen. But it's probably going to be someone coming from the Bucks. But I've got Cohen as well. All right, the Raiders. I mentioned the flaw in their thinking a little bit already, but let's go ahead and pick a coach from this candidate pool. Who do you have going to the Raiders?
Jeez, man, I don't know. I'm almost afraid to make a prediction here.
Just do the
I,
fun
I
one. Just do the
let
fun
me
one.
eliminate a couple. I don't think it's Ron Rivera, and I don't think it's Robert Saleh. Okay,
Hmm.
I just
Hmm.
don't figure they're coming. But man, between Spagnolo, Monken, Joseph, that's Vance Joseph, even Pete Carroll, I could see him pulling any one of those four guys.
Give me Pete Carroll, man. Give
Okay.
me Pete Carroll. Let's do it. Tom Brady, Pete Carroll in the building. Um, and then he'll go get Gus Bradley back. Did Gus Bradley coach the Raiders at some point? Did that happen?
Well, I can't remember. Sorry,
I'm gonna look that
doesn't
up.
sound familiar, but
I know he was Jags at some point, right? Was he ever with the Raiders? Las Vegas Raiders defensive coordinator in 2021.
okay, there you go.
Got fired from that too. He'll bring him back, and I don't know what he's gonna do at OC. Well, it doesn't matter. They don't have a quarterback anyways. Um, all right, let's get to who's up next here. The Saints, New Orleans Saints. Who do you got going to New Orleans?
Yeah, you listen. If Aaron Glenn goes to the Jets, like I think I'm going to go ahead and pull in Mike McCarthy over to the Saints. Man, listen,
Hmm.
I think it's a decent fit. Even though I don't love the Saints, I don't love McCarthy. I feel like they could at least have a chance to compete in this division. It's not the worst division in football. So look, give me McCarthy there to the Saints.
Give me that, and yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad. I think he and Derek Carr would be a pretty good fit together. Honestly, I think McCarthy is a little like Doug Peterson, where floor raiser, maybe not true ceiling guy. And I say that
Yeah,
McCarthy, but obviously better regular season output than Peterson over the last several years. Give me Joe Brady though. He has the ties to Sean Payton. He was an offensive assistant for 2 years under him. Was obviously at LSU as the pass game coordinator for a little bit there. Give me Joe Brady to the Saints to try and sort through all of that. I don't have anything on the defensive side off the top of my head. Maybe Leslie Frazier goes over there with him. They were in Buffalo, I think, at the same time there for a little bit. So give me Joe Brady for the Saints. And then the Cowboys. That lackluster Cowboys thing. You thought I was going to forget about going back up to the Cowboys. We have three exciting names there, Ben, for you to choose from. Do you want to pick one of those three, or are you going to give me a wild card pick?
yeah. I don't have a strong feeling here, but give me Kellen Moore.
Yep.
I don't really want that to happen, to be honest. I really don't. But I have heard smoke around that name for a few weeks now, to be honest, even before McCarthy was let go. And we know that, a year or 2 years ago, uh, he was getting considered by people in the Dallas area for this
Hmm.
head coaching job. It's like, hey, let go of McCarthy and let Moore be the guy, or let Quinn be the guy, right? Maybe you're maybe reaching back 3 seasons there. I don't remember, but give me Kellen Moore.
Yeah, I've got Kellen Moore too. Feels like this whole thing, I had hopes for Dallas and what they were going to do with this, but this whole thing, this process for them feels like a reminder that Jerry's just going to do what's best for Jerry in the end. Um, so let's get a guy he already knows, has a relationship with. Dak likes the media and everyone in the building's familiar with, and he could probably tell Kellen Moore what to do like 90% of the time. And listen, Kellen Moore, he's lost out on, head coaching opportunities over the last couple of years. He interviewed a couple of those years. Um, while he was with Dallas. I think he got an interview even last year after his stint with the Chargers. I think he was getting a couple of interviews. So this is a guy that's like losing his opportunity to get a cycle. So he might just have to go back to Dallas to a familiar situation and do what Jerry
Yeah,
Jones tells him, but he gets to coach Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and try to rebuild that thing in a place he's familiar. So I've got Kellen Moore as well. Ben, anything else for you on coaching, hiring, firing, GM, NFL stuff here on this early Tuesday morning?
Uh, no, not a lot. We have done a good job passing through this over the past few weeks, and if you've listened to us for this long, I know we've gotten deep into some of this stuff, and maybe even names that some of y'all don't know, names some of y'all do. But thanks for hanging out with us and catching on to a lot of these names. And we tried to give you an honest representation, not only of what chance they've got of these jobs, but of what we actually feel like texture wise they might be able to do. So thank you everybody for listening.
Yeah, thank you all so much for listening and watching. This is the Box Score Network on YouTube. Make sure you're checking out all of our audio pods. Make sure you're checking out our preview show every single week. This week, I think it'll go up probably Sunday morning, but maybe we'll get it to you a little early once again here on a Saturday for your weekend's enjoyment. But we'll be talking about the conference championship games coming up. And yeah, all the audio versions of all the podcasts. Make sure you're checking that out wherever you get your pods for more NFL content. Ben and I will be back on this feed at some point to do more other off-season type content and stuff. But just make sure you subscribe, make sure you like this video, and follow us on Twitter at BScore Network to stay up to date. So thank you all so much. Have a great week. We will talk to you soon.